new polling data suggests Canadians are worried about the number of asylum seekers coming into this country, and many aren't satisfied with how the federal government is handling it. The survey shows Canadians think the number of people crossing into this country is too high, even though a majority of respondents didn't know what the number was. Nearly half of respondents thought more than 50,000 people had crossed into the country since the beginning of 2017, but that number is actually closer to 30,000. However, when respondents were told the real number of border crossers, 65% still felt it was too many people for Canada to handle. 67% of people called it a crisis, and more Canadians trust Andrew Scheer to handle the situation than Justin Trudeau. So is the government concerned about Canadians' attitudes towards asylum seekers? Are there more people crossing the border than Canada can handle? Joining me now from Toronto is the Minister of Border Security, Bill Blair. So, Minister Blair, how do you explain the fact that, according to this survey, more people trust Andrew Scheer to handle the border issue than the Prime Minister?
Well, quite frankly, I find that perplexing because I've heard nothing in the way of a sensible response or plan from Mr. Scheer or from his government. You know, some of the things that they have proposed about, creating a 9,000-kilometer regular border crossing is frankly unworkable and a little silly. What we have been doing is managing the situation that exists, but also working on both sides of the border, working with Americans, working with other countries, communicating with people who would seek asylum here, making sure that they clearly understand the rule of law and that seeking asylum in this country is not a free ticket. This is a situation that has represented a challenge to certain municipalities, certainly Toronto, Montreal, but it's a situation that's being very assertively managed. And I want to assure Canadians that their safety and security is being taken care of, regardless of how a person enters into the country, either at a regular border point or regularly at another location. The RCMP are there, and they're doing all the background and security checks to make sure there's no criminality and no national security threat.
You say that you are managing it. You said that a couple of times. You talked about being perplexed by these survey results. Canadians, a majority of them, according to this survey, say they think this is a crisis. So what do you need to do differently to address this? There's
been a lot of unfortunate, I think, misleading rhetoric with respect to this issue. And one of the things that your survey indicated that you
Such as what, sir?
Well, and for example, Canadians are under the impression that almost twice as many people are coming across the border as are in fact the case. And so those inflated numbers, I think, have been, people have been somewhat misled by that information. And as well, I think it's important for people to understand how the law is being applied and how, federal organizations are managing those irregular crossers. Everyone's subjected to security checks. Everyone is thoroughly vetted. And the only difference, quite frankly, for how these individuals are treated when they present themselves irregularly at an other than official border crossing is they are not subject because they're exempted under the existing Safe Third Country Agreement.
Your government certainly has been talking about this for months. Canadians clearly aren't getting what you say is the accurate message. So what do you need to do differently? What needs to change in order to convince Canadians that this is, as you say, not a crisis?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we be able to demonstrate and show Canadians exactly what is transpiring at their border. Again, some of the rhetoric has been frankly fear-based, and we need to be able to provide people with facts so that they can make an informed, have an informed opinion about what is transpiring at the border. And at the same time, we have the responsibility to make sure that all of those processes are not only, in accordance with the rule of law, but that they are also efficient. And so our government's been working very hard to make sure that the resources are available to facilitate those processes, and where there is a disparate impact on certain municipalities, as there was in Toronto today, to come and demonstrate we're willing to work with the City of Toronto to address those impacts, to make sure that the funding and resources are in place to manage this correctly.
I'd like to pick up on what you're saying about Toronto, because of course you did pony up $11 million, but the City of Toronto says it needs to be reimbursed some $64.5 million. Is the rest of that money going to come from the federal government? Do you think that's the province's responsibility? What's going on there?
Well, let me tell you that there are a number of ways in which funds flow through the provinces or directly, in this case, to the municipalities. We met with the City of Toronto. They identified an $11 million extraordinary expense that they were having, and that money is now in their hands. They also said they needed funding to provide temporary housing for people that had to vacate the college dorms they've been occupying, and that had to be done by August 9th. We've come in and we're paying for those rooms and making them available. It's also really important to highlight, I think, for Canadians, the City of Toronto's done such an extraordinary job. There were 800 people in those dormitories. As of this morning, 272 require temporary housing, and the rest have been moved out of that temporary shelter situation into more permanent housing. And I think that demonstrates how it works well when we work together.
So you talk about putting many of those people are going into hotels. The government has agreed to cover the cost for an additional 2 months. What happens after that? What happens to these people September 31st?
Yesterday, there were 376 people in the dormitories. This morning, there are 272. The City of Toronto is working very hard to move those people out of temporary shelter, which up until next week is in the dormitories. Beyond that, will be in other temporary housing, mostly hotel rooms. But we're moving those people into permanent housing solutions. There's a triage.
You're guaranteeing they will all have permanent housing by September 31st?
What we are guaranteeing is that we'll be still there with the City of Toronto to make sure that situation is appropriately managed. You know, we are a good partner to the City of Toronto. We're working together on this.
So you're offering money beyond September 31st then?
What we are doing is offering our support. We're not, our relationship and our work with the City of Toronto doesn't end on September 30th. It goes forward in the same collaborative way that it has been working all summer. But in addition to that, we're bringing additional municipalities through a triage system across Ontario. We've heard from a lot of municipalities in Ontario who are not only willing to take these individuals but are asking for them. They've got jobs, they've got opportunities for them, they want and need these people to come into their communities, and through the triage system we're going to be able to direct some of these individuals who are seeking asylum, and while they await the due process to which they are lawfully entitled, they will be able to move into communities where they'll be able to contribute and where the communities welcome them. And that'll relieve a lot of the pressure that the City of Toronto has been experiencing.
You talk about the province of Ontario. The provincial government wants a lot more money from you, as you know, some $200 million. You've talked about wanting more information from them. So what do you need to see? They've given you a basic breakdown of where that sum comes from. What else do you need to see in order to be able to hand over that money?
Well, as I mentioned, Catherine, there are a number of ways in which federal funds are transferred to the provinces through various federal transfer payments. And so I think it's important that we have an opportunity to have a very frank discussion with the minister. I'm very fortunate. I've had a number of conversations already with Minister MacLeod. I look forward to working with her on this. We've received her correspondence. We clearly have a lot of work to do.
I'm still not sure I understand what it is that you need, though, other than a further discussion with them. What kind of information are you looking for in order to be able to give them more money?
Frankly, we need a far more specific breakdown on what those costs are and why they are extraordinary to existing other payments. And so, you know, we've got a very round figure from them. There's still a lot of work to do. We're really hoping, quite frankly, and I remain confident that, you know, we'll have an opportunity to sit down with our counterparts in the province of Ontario, as we've been working all along with the province of Quebec. And to some extent as well in Manitoba, that has also been impacted by this. You know, this is the work that is necessary, and I'm confident that, you know, letters and rhetoric notwithstanding, we need to come together, have a conversation, and work out, you know, how we can best support each other and how we can all fulfill our each individual and collective responsibilities to the people that we represent.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today, Minister Bill Blair.
Thank you, Catherine.